10 days into a government shutdown, and the Trump administration just did something that's never been done before in American history. They didn't just furlough federal workers. They didn't just send people home without pay. They fired them permanently. Over 4,000 people. Gone, not coming back. And if you think this is about budget cuts or efficiency, you haven't been paying attention. This is about weaponizing dysfunction. This is about turning a government shutdown into a purge. And what's happening right now should terrify anyone who understands that the line between political hardball and authoritarian power plays is thinner than most people want to believe. The RIFs have begun. That's what Russell Vought, Trump's budget director, posted on social media Friday morning. RIFs, reduction in force. That's the bureaucratic term for you're fired. You're done. Clear out your desk. And don't expect to come back when this is over. Over 4,000 federal workers just got reduction in force notices across 7 departments, with Treasury and Health and Human Services getting hit the hardest, accounting for more than half of the layoffs. But it doesn't stop there. Other agencies are actively considering whether to conduct additional RIFs, meaning this could just be the beginning. Now let's be clear about what normally happens during a government shutdown. Workers get furloughed. They stay home. They don't get paid. But when the shutdown ends, they come back. They get their back pay. The government resumes. It's painful. It's stupid. But it's temporary. That's how it's always worked. Every single shutdown in modern American history has followed that pattern until now. This goes far beyond what usually happens in a government shutdown, because what Trump and Vought are doing isn't just letting a crisis go to waste. They're manufacturing a crisis to accomplish something they couldn't do through normal legislative means. They're using the shutdown as cover to slash the federal workforce, to permanently eliminate positions, to reshape government by chaos rather than through Congress. And here's where it gets legally sketchy, actually, legally insane. Union leaders are calling these firings illegal. They've sued the administration. They're asking federal judges for restraining orders, because according to constitutional scholars and appropriations law experts, there's no statute, no appropriation, no constitutional clause that gives the president the authority to fire federal civilian employees simply because funding has lapsed. Think about that. The government shuts down because Congress can't pass a funding bill, and the president uses that shutdown, that failure to agree on a budget, as justification to permanently eliminate thousands of jobs. It's like burning down your house because the electricity got shut off. It makes no sense unless destruction is the actual goal. The Education Department had about 4,100 employees when Trump took office in January, but its workforce was nearly halved amid mass layoffs in the administration's first months. At the start of the shutdown, it had about 2,500 employees, and now they're cutting even deeper. The department that's supposed to oversee American education, already gutted, is getting dismantled in real time. At Health and Human Services, roughly 1,100 to 1,200 employees got notices. These are people who work on public health, on disease control, on healthcare programs that millions of Americans depend on. At Treasury, 1,446 workers got fired. The agency that manages the nation's finances, collects taxes, and prevents financial crimes, decimated. And if you're thinking these cuts are targeting waste and inefficiency, consider this. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is getting hit. With layoffs, CISA, the agency responsible for protecting America's critical infrastructure from cyber attacks, at a time when foreign adversaries are constantly probing our systems, when ransomware attacks are crippling hospitals and schools, when election security is a national concern, they're firing the people whose job is to defend against those threats. Why? Well, a DHS spokesperson said the layoffs at CISA were part of getting the agency back on mission after it was focused on censorship, branding, and electioneering during the last administration. Translation: CISA's former director confirmed that Trump lost the 2020 election, and now the entire agency is being punished. That's not efficiency, that's retribution. Let's talk about who's pushing back, because it's not just Democrats. Senator Susan Collins, the Republican chair of the Appropriations Committee who oversees government funding, said, "I've made very clear that I do not believe there should be firings of furloughed workers." And after the layoffs began, she said she strongly opposes Vought's attempt to permanently lay off federal workers. Senator Lisa Murkowski, another Republican on the Appropriations Committee, criticized the layoffs as poorly timed and yet another example of the administration's punitive actions toward the federal workforce. When Republicans who chair the committees that fund the government are telling you you've gone too far, maybe you've gone too far, but Vought doesn't care, Trump doesn't care, and here's why this is so dangerous. Trump said earlier this week that if the shutdown keeps going, the job eliminations will be substantial, and a lot of those jobs will never come back. Read that again, never come back. He's not even pretending this is about the shutdown. He's admitting it's about permanently shrinking government. Now, you might be thinking, good, government's too big, cut the fat, drain the swamp. And look, there's a legitimate conversation to be had about the size and efficiency of federal bureaucracy. But that conversation happens through legislation, through oversight, through the democratic process, not through exploiting a funding crisis to bypass Congress and unilaterally fire thousands of people. Because here's what nobody's talking about. Once you establish the precedent that a president can use, a government shutdown to permanently eliminate federal positions, you've handed every future president a loaded weapon. Imagine if the next Democratic president used a shutdown to fire everyone at Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or everyone at the Department of Energy who works on fossil fuel projects. Conservatives would lose their minds, and they'd be right too, because that's not how our system is supposed to work. The Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse. Congress decides what gets funded and what doesn't, not the president acting alone during a crisis. And what Trump and Vaught are doing right now is an end run around that constitutional structure. They couldn't convince Congress to eliminate these positions, so they're using the shutdown to do it anyway. The Partnership for Public Service, a nonpartisan organization that tracks federal service, says more than 200,000 civil servants have left since the start of this administration in January due to earlier firings, retirements, and deferred resignation offers. 200,000. That's the entire population of a mid-sized American city, gone from federal service in 9 months. And these aren't just numbers. These are people who inspect food safety, who process veterans' benefits, who respond to natural disasters, who conduct medical research, who protect national security. When you hollow out the federal workforce this dramatically, services collapse, expertise vanishes, institutional knowledge walks out the door and doesn't come back. Max Stier, president of the Partnership for Public Service, said these unnecessary and misguided reductions in force will further hollow out our federal government, rob it of critical expertise, and hobble its capacity to effectively serve the public. But maybe that's the point. Maybe hobbling government's capacity is exactly what this is designed to do. There's a philosophy that's been floating around conservative circles for decades. Starve the beast. The idea is you cut taxes to reduce government revenue, then use those revenue shortfalls as justification to cut government programs, make government fail, then point to that failure as proof that government doesn't work. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. What we're seeing now is the 2025 version. Shut down the beast. Can't pass a budget. Fine. Use the shutdown to fire everyone. When government services collapse because there's nobody left to provide them, blame government incompetence, not the deliberate sabotage that caused the collapse. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said, let's be blunt. Nobody's forcing Trump and Vaught to do this. They don't have to do it. They want to. They're callously choosing to hurt people. The workers who protect our country, inspect our food, respond when disasters strike. This is deliberate chaos. And he's absolutely right. This is a choice. This is deliberate. The shutdown itself is a failure of governance. Republicans control the Senate. Democrats are demanding healthcare provisions. In the funding bill, nobody's willing to compromise, so the government shuts down. That's dysfunction. But it's familiar dysfunction. We've seen it before. What's unprecedented is using that dysfunction as a weapon, turning a temporary crisis into permanent destruction, and doing it in a way that might be illegal, that violates decades of precedent, that even members of your own party are calling reckless. And here's the most chilling part. A senior administration official said those RIFs are a snapshot in time and represent only where things were at the time of the court filing, suggesting the situation remains fluid. More are coming. The 4,000 fired so far are just the first wave. So where does this end? When does the president decide he's cut enough, eliminated enough positions, punished enough workers for the crime of working for the federal government? There's no answer, because there's no limiting principle here. If the president can fire thousands during a shutdown with no congressional approval, no judicial oversight, no accountability, then what can't he do? This isn't about efficiency. It's not about saving money. Because firing workers during a shutdown doesn't save money. There's no budget being spent anyway because the government is shut down. This is about power, about establishing that the executive branch can do whatever it wants during a crisis. And if you create enough crises, you can do whatever you want, period. Federal unions are suing. Democratic lawmakers are objecting. Some Republicans are uncomfortable, but the firings are happening anyway. Notices are going out. People are losing their jobs. Families are losing their incomes. And the federal government is losing the institutional capacity to function. Everett Kelly, president of the American Federation of Government Employees, said it is disgraceful that the Trump administration has used the government shutdown as an excuse to illegally fire thousands of workers who provide critical services to communities across the country. And whether you think federal government is too big or too small, whether you voted for Trump or against him, you should be concerned when any president claims the power to unilaterally dismantle government institutions during a crisis. Because the precedent being set right now isn't about this administration or this president. It's about what future presidents will claim they can do. It's about whether we still have a system where Congress controls spending and the executive branch executes, or whether we've entered a new era where emergency powers are the norm and constitutional constraints are suggestions. 10 days into a shutdown, 4,000 federal workers fired. More on the way, and the Trump administration celebrating it like a victory. The RIFs have begun. As if firing people during a crisis is something to brag about. As if turning dysfunction into destruction is good governance. This is what happens when chaos becomes policy, when breaking things is the strategy, when the goal isn't to make government work better, but to prove it doesn't work at all. And once you've succeeded in proving that, once you've dismantled enough institutions and fired enough people and created enough dysfunction, what comes next? That's the question nobody in power seems willing to ask, and the answer should terrify all of us.